I'm Ben Cassidy from Hammer & Tongs Polymer Development. I'm a chemist and I entered the Pivot 2022 Datathon to learn more about geothermal energy and data science. So the goal of this Datathon was to determine the best theoretical placement for the production well to pair with the injection well 16A at the Utah Forge geothermal test site. The optimum placement of this production well was to be evaluated on the maximum electrical power output over 20 years. So for my model, the goal was to maximize the average P out over 20 years. And in this data set, P out represents a single flash ranking cycle with 100% efficiency. So first, to begin the data cleaning process, I added custom variables based on the time sets. So this would be like the initial, the final values, the average values, and so on. And then I removed unrealistic data. For example, if the volume of fluid recovered was greater than the volume that was injected, I deleted those. And the NADA numbers in the 1-year data set I replaced with 0 as appropriate. For the model strategy, I first assessed relationships among the data using NumPy, Matplotlib, and Seaborn. For this, or after I did this, I removed columns that duplicated each other or showed no variation. If they correlated perfectly, I got rid of them. Then I formed the model using the software FlowJo. Now this is a software that's commonly used in biochemistry, immunology, the life sciences. And what it does is it allows for manipulation and slicing, in particular, of very large data sets. So this is similar to forming a decision tree in traditional machine learning. So the key insight that I realized from looking at the data was that if you can avoid having a failed well, you're already most of the way to getting a successful solution. So for this, I split the data into failed wells, where the average power output over the 20-year time span was 0, and successful wells, where they at least produced some power. Then I compared the correlations for our failed wells versus all wells. And what shook out was that the single most important indicator of whether your well fails or not is whether it has a low enthalpy of produced water, or H-Pro. In short, if you don't get hot enough water, you don't generate power. Therefore, we should create a model that minimizes likelihood of a failed well. So I'd like to direct your attention to this pseudocolor plot I have here on the left. On the x-axis, we have the average power output over the 20-year lifespan of a well. And on the y-axis, we have enthalpy of production. And how you interpret these pseudocolor plots is that areas with brighter colors, green, yellow, orange, red, successively have more and more population density of simulated wells in that area. So you can see here on the bottom left, we have this large red region of low enthalpy of production and 0 power output. So that means if you have low enthalpy of production, below about 800 according to this, you're very likely not to get any power output whatsoever. Whereas you can see if you get enthalpy of production above 800, you have a much higher likelihood of actually producing some power. So if we want to maximize the enthalpy of production, H-Pro, this requires sort of a careful balance between our input variables. So first we want to look at well spacing, how far the production well is from the injection well. And you can see as you increase well spacing here on the y-axis, go from 0 to 200 to 400, the density, the population density of H-Pro also increases. You can see the higher you go, the more likely you are to get a successful well, or well that has high H-Pro. Similarly, we want to keep the circulation flow rate, Q, we want to keep that low. You can see here, if we increase it past about 0.02, we really start to drop off in the number of wells that have an H-Pro above 800. However, H-Pro is not the only thing that we want to maximize. We also want to optimize the M-Pro, the production mass flow rate. And by convention in this data set, it's negative, so we want to make this more negative. And the ways we can do this are by increasing the number of well intervals or injection intervals, and also by increasing the circulation flow rate Q. So you can see this is going to be sort of at odds. We want to increase Q in order to improve MPro, but we want to decrease Q in order to improve HPro. One last thing we want to take into consideration is that we can't make the well spacing too far. If we do that, then our fracs won't intersect the production well. And of course, like I already said, if our spacing's too close, our injected water won't heat up. We won't get a high enough HPro. So the best idea is to increase the spacing, then tailor the Q to hit that sweet spot. And this is going to be pretty important going forward. You can see here on this plot, we have P out on the x-axis, and that's a log scale, and we have Q on the y-axis. And you can see there's a spot right there in orange that has a relatively, it's relatively easy to hit, but it has a very high P out compared to most other populations on this table. Step one, we're going to optimize that sweet spot using the 30-year data set. So first we take a slice containing all data that has well intervals equal to 6, and then we take a slice centered around a well spacing of 700 meters. Then we see that in order to hit that sweet spot, we need a Q of about 0.012 cubic meters per second. So that captures a large population with very high power production, and it doesn't capture any of these other problematic populations, such as large populations with zero power output, or this large red swath that has mediocre power output below at lower Qs. And taking a histogram of this slice, we can see that our median power output is 426 kilowatts. That's there in the bottom left. So this method minimizes probability of a failed well, and it has a low standard deviation in the expected power production. Other strategies either greatly increase the risk of a failed well, lowering the median power production, or fail to capture the region containing that maximum power production. And using this model replicates well on the other data sets provided. Doing the exact same thing, we hit the sweet spot on the 30-year more wells, 20-year wide, and the 1-year data set. The 20-year standard data set was not included because it had a low N once we got to this point. The next step is to add in the skew and phase variables, and this was done using all 20 and 30-year data sets combined. I found that we need to set skew to 0.075 and phase to 1.57, so vertically below the injection well. So before doing this, the median power output is 418 kilowatts, and after performing these final optimizations, we increase it to 544 kilowatts with a standard deviation of 225. So that's enough to power 440 US households, and it's comparable to a 1.5 megawatt wind turbine. So just to show you how far we've come, this is that same plot from the beginning of the presentation showing power output on the x-axis versus enthalpy on the y-axis. And you can see that after applying this decision tree that we formed, we're selecting for a population of wells on the very forefront of power output. Just to wrap things up, where should we put the production well? We should put it 700 meters away from the injection well with 6 injection intervals, a Q of 0.012 meters cubed per second, a skew of 0.075, and a phase vertically below the injection well. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my talk, and have a great rest of the conference.